The 23rd session of the Senate in the 3rd regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. May I ask our colleagues to please stand for a minute of silence, to observe a minute of silence for a silent prayer. Thank you. With the permission of the Chamber, we declare 1 minute recess. Session is resumed. The Secretary will now call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan, Peter Compañero S., Cayetano Pia S., Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Honasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar. Senate President Trilon.
14 senators are present. The chair declares the presence of a quorum. The majority leader. Who's the majority leader?
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 22nd session, September 15, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the journal of session number 22, September 15, 2015 is hereby dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved. May the chair suggest that we defer the reference of business to the end of the session so that we can avail of the presence of our colleagues to take up other businesses.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill 2951 under Committee Report 251 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. This is the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund.
Can we have a 1 minute suspension? Mahaba ba, ano? We have to read the order of business. Sige. Session is resumed. To enable us to take the matter of the Senate bill mentioned by the majority leader, we have to first read the reference of business. So we reconsider our previous request that the reference of business be placed in the last item in the agenda, and therefore we direct the Secretary to read the reference of business.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 1583, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the 2014 COA report that the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology has failed to implement the Dynasty Slope project, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Science and Technology.
PS Resolution number 1584, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the report that some 10,000 Filipinos are afflicted with diseases that are difficult to diagnose and
Health and Demography.
1585, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the recent Commission audit report that the government wasted 201.53 million.
Economic Affairs and Finance.
1586, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in legislation, the report that the school head and 2 Lumad leaders were killed.
Rules, Committee on Rules.
Committee reports. Committee report number 249, prepared, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice, Human Rights, and Finance on Senate number 2950 with Senators Escudero, Sencha, Villar, Ligarda, and Pimentel III as authors thereof, entitled an act modernizing the National Bureau of Investigation, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, recommending approval in substitution of Senate numbers 429 and 9902, sponsor Senator Pimentel III.
Calendar for Ordinary Business.
Committee report number 250, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance on Senate number 2137, introduced by Senators Defensor Santiago, Sani Angara, Recto, Ejercito, Estrada, Grace Po, Soto III, Pimentel III, and Cynthia A. Villar, entitled an act providing a framework for the right to adequate food, recommending its approval without amendment, Senator Pimentel III.
Ordinary Business.
Committee report number 251, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance on Senate number 2951 with Senators Recto, Grace Po, and Cynthia A. Villar as authors thereof, entitled an act amending the period of collection and utilization of the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, ASEF, amending for the purpose RA 8178 as amended, otherwise known as an act replacing quantitative import restrictions on agricultural products except rice with tariffs, creating the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, and for other purposes, recommending approval in substitution of Senate numbers 2131, taking into consideration PS Resolution numbers 495, 549, and 1452, sponsor Senator Cynthia A. Villar.
Calendar for Ordinary Business. The rest of the reference of business can be taken up at the end of the session for today. The Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill 2951 under Committee Report 251 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill 2951 under Committee Report 251.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
Permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Number 2951, an act amending the period of collection and utilization of the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, ASEF, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 8178 is amended, otherwise known as an act replacing quantitative import restrictions on agricultural products except rice with tariffs, creating the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
I move that we recognize Senator Cynthia Villar, the Chairman of the Committee on Agriculture, to sponsor the measure, Mr. President.
Senator Cynthia Villar is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, my fellow senators, I stand here today to sponsor Senate Bill number 2951 under Committee Report number 251, an act amending the period of collection and utilization of the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, or ASEF, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 8178 as amended, otherwise known as an act replacing quantitative import restrictions on agricultural products except rice with tariffs, creating the ASEF and for other purposes. Committee Report 251 is prepared and submitted jointly by the Committee on Agriculture and Food and the Committee on Finance. The said committee report is in substitution of Senate Bill number 2131 filed by this representation and taking into consideration proposed Senate Resolution numbers 495 filed by Senator Ralph Recto, 549 filed by Senator Grace Poe, and 1452 filed by this representation. The implementation of the agricultural program under the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, or ASEF, has been faced with some allegations of inefficiencies, inconsistencies, misuse, among others. Thus, our committee, prompted by bills and resolution, looked closely into it through the Senate hearing that we conducted. As most of you are aware of, the Regional Economic Integration under the ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, is taking effect this December. ASEF is supposed to help prepare farmers and fishermen compete with their counterparts in ASEAN countries as markets become liberalized. In particular, it aimed at helping small farmers and fisher folks increase their production and profitability, as well as make them competent and competitive by funding their training, among others. Based on studies, among the barriers that keep Filipino farmers from being more competitive and successful are lack of technical expertise, inadequate access to socialized credit, and lack of mechanization. Ang pagtulong sa mga maliliit na magsasaka at mga mangingisda para maiangat sila sa kahirapan ay isa sa pangunahing dahilan kung bakit pinursigi ito ng Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food. Until now, 25% of our population are still living below the poverty line. 40% of the farmers and fisher folks are living below the poverty line. Poverty incidence among farmers at 36.7% is higher than the average for the whole country, which stood at 27.9%, based on the latest available figures from NSCB. Thus, if we really wanted to make a significant move in reducing poverty, helping poor farmers and fisher folks is the way to start. That is as inclusive as we want to be. Small farmers and fisher folks need to learn or acquire winning skills and strategies to give them competitive advantage. Continuing education and training is key. In my interaction with farmers, I found out that what separates an award-winning and profitable farmer from an ordinary one is simply employing the correct strategy in farming. Halimbawa, ang isang Gawad Saka awardee na magsasaka ay kayang kumita ng 50,000 pesos per hectare sa isang buwan. Samantalang ang isang ordinaryong magsasaka na may isang ektarya rin ay 4,000 pesos lang ang kinikita. Because one is using more effective and profitable farming techniques than the other. For instance, many do not even know the simple technique of intercropping that can really multiply their income. The importance of access to education and training cannot be overemphasized, especially for poor farming families and communities. But it is a sad reality that they do not have the resources to seek further training or education and communities. But it is a sad reality that they do not have the resources to seek are supposed to feel. But of course, the ASEP is more than the scholarship program. It also extends grants and loans, but it was plagued by issues of poor collection efforts and non-payment. The fact that the intended beneficiaries did loans and grants. When we reviewed the ASEP fund utilization, ang intended beneficiaries ay mga maliliit na magsasaka, malinaw na hindi sila ang mga napautang kung hindi ang mga big enterprises. But Mr. President, while there are issues on the implementation of the ASEP over the last 15 years, the fact remains that the purpose for which it was created, to fund agricultural competitiveness enhancement, remains very important. Now more than ever, in fact, regional integration under the ASEAN Economic Community is upon us. AEC's implementation will commence at the end of the year, coincidentally right at about the same time that the ASEP utilization will expire. Filipino farmers and fisher folks are still among the poorest in our country. They need continued support in training, education, capital, among others, to enhance their competitiveness amidst intensifying competition, the very essence of ASEP. In reality, actually, they need to be more competitive for the most basic of reason, to survive on a daily basis. Hindi na nga para makipag-compete sa big players, para na lang lumaki ang kanilang kita at maitaguyod ang kanilang mga pamilya. Imagine may mga coconut farmers na kumikita lang ng 50 pesos sa isang araw. 50 pesos meron pa ba sa atin dito na kayang mabuhay sa halagang iyan? Sa pamasahe o pambili ng bigas pa lang, kulang na ang 50 pesos. Maganda ang intensyon ng ASEF, ang mga butas rin sa pulisya at mga alutuntunin. May mga butas sa pulisya at alutuntunin. Pero hindi ibig sabihin ay dapat ihinto. Kapag nasira ang isang bagay, hindi naman kailangang ibasura agad. Pwedeng ayusin at mapakinabangan muli. At sa puntong ito, dapat ang makinabang ay ang mga talagang dapat makinabang. This time around, we will strictly ensure that the projects to be funded will really enhance the competitiveness of target project beneficiaries or sectors, especially the small farmers and fisher folks. Hindi kailangan na ang ating mga maliliit na magsasaka at mangingisda ng napakalaking halaga dahil pihadong sa malaking grupo at impos para mas lalong marami rin ang maka-avail at makinabang. 80% of the fund will be in the form of credit with minimal interest, which shall not exceed 5 million pesos per project loan, for the acquisition and establishment of agri-based production and post-production and processing machineries, equipment, and facilities to achieve modern agricultural practices to be managed by the Land Bank of the Philippines. For the remainder of the fund, 20%, 10% will be extended as grants for research and development of agricultural and fishery products and the commercialization of such, including the upgrading of research facilities of qualified state universities and colleges, which again shall not exceed 5 million pesos per project. And 10% will be used for the funding of a comprehensive scholarship and attractive grant-in-aid program for agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and veterinary medicine education to be implemented by the Commission on Higher Education. As such, for those purposes, we are recommending the extension of the utilization period of the Agricultural Competitiveness Enhancement Fund, or ASEP, which is expiring on December of this year, to until 2020. As cited earlier, Filipino farmers and fisher folks remain among the poorest sectors in our country, an agricultural country at that. They need ASEF to make them not only more competitive, but more productive. The agriculture sector also needs the boost that ASEF can provide. And in the spirit of inclusive growth that we are aiming for, we cannot deprive them of the support that they can get from ASEF, just because the fund was mishandled and misused in the past. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I earnestly seek the swift passage of Committee Report number 251. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Villar. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Ralph Recto will also deliver a co-sponsorship speech next week. So in view of that, and to give our colleagues more time to study the bill, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2951.
Consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration, with the permission of the Senate, of Senate Bill 2894 under Committee Report number 200.
Any objection? Hearing none, assumption of consideration of the measure is in order.
We move to recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Local Government, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And to interpellate is Senator Tito Soto.
To avail of the period of interpellation, Senator Soto is recognized. 1 minute suspension. Mamaya paalala mo sa akin mag-text na ako kay Serge tungkol sa BBO. To, pwede na? The session is resumed. Senator Marcos, the principal sponsor, is once more recognized.
Yes, Mr.
And the Senator Soto, on the period of interpellation, is likewise recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, well, for the record, I beg the indulgence of the distinguished sponsor, but I wish to be educated, enlightened, and awakened by the sponsor on the basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. So I have tried to put together my questions or my interpellation into 4 parts. Originally it was 6, down to 4. Let me start with part 1 today, Mr. President, and I hope to finish by 1 part a day, so that I can help in discussing the bill faster, Mr. President. So will the gentleman yield to this interpellation from this representation, Mr. President?
Certainly, Mr. President, to the gentleman from Quezon City, we will endeavor to throw as much light and to present as much information as possible, so as to make it clear the different sections and provisions that he intends to take up. So with that, again, Mr. President, I yield to the gentleman from Quezon City.
Thank you. Mr. President, may we know the reason why this bill does not have definition of terms? Will the committee introduce the inclusion of definition of terms during the committee amendments, Mr. President?
We did that because I feel that there is no need. The terms as we have right now seem to be, in my view, self-explanatory. The only change in terms were around the word Bangsamoro, and let me explain what I mean by that. When we were as we were going through the Bangsamoro, the first draft of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, we found ourselves using the word Bangsamoro in many different ways. We were using it to describe the Bangsamoro people. We were using it to describe the Bangsamoro region. We were using it to describe the Bangsamoro government and sometimes even the parliament. And so, just in the interest of clarity, we decided amongst ourselves that the region will be called the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. The area that is encompassed by the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region will be called that, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Then there is the Bangsamoro government, the Bangsamoro Parliament, which I feel is clear enough. And when we use the word Bangsamoro by itself, the meaning that we ascribe to it is the people. So the Bangsamoro are the Bangsamoro people as defined in the substitute bill, now what we are referring to as the basic law of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, as the gentleman I'm sure is aware. In Article 2, Section 4, there is a very clear definition of the Bangsamoro people. And that now, now we use the word Bangsamoro to mean those that fall under the definition of Article 2, Section 4 of the substitute bill, which is lifted verbatim from the draft BBL.
I get the point of the gentleman, Mr. President, although I have a somehow deviated perspective. As a matter of fact, you were able to answer my second question somehow, no? Because
Another new term is the non-Moro. Just to, in the interest of completeness, Mr. President, the other new term that we have in the substitute bill is the non-Moro indigenous communities or non-Moro indigenous peoples. This now specifically is referring to what we normally call IPs. Pero hindi na maaring gamitin yung IP dahil kung titignan mo ang definition ng IP as we know it, the definition of IP as we know it would include even the Bangsamoro people. So to remove the confusion, we now have the two groups. There is the Bangsamoro people as defined in Section 4, and we now have the Non-Moro indigenous peoples, which is the indigenous people of that area who are not Muslims.
All right. Well, before I go to, I said my second question that was somehow answered, but not entirely. There are several terms in the bill that are unfamiliar to me, to this representation, Mr. President, like block grants, Umrah, Haram, Hajj, etc. So I was thinking that these terms should be defined so that it will be clear to those of us who will not only support the measure, but those who will implement the measure, or people who are not familiar with the bar.
Yes, Mr. President, that point is well taken. It is, I suppose, what the rule that we followed is that if there is no definition found anywhere else, like if we look it up in the dictionary, or we Google it and Wikipedia it, or what, and it's available, like the terms that the gentleman mentioned, like the Hajj, is easily discovered what the Hajj is, the pilgrimage to Mecca, Haram, which are not disallowed items that are not allowed under the Quran. These kind of terms have a generally accepted meaning, and that generally accepted meaning is found in many reference materials. But having said that, Mr. President, if the gentleman feels that it is necessary for us to make a very precise definition of those terms and to include it in the bill, then I do not see any harm in that.
Yes.
Because it is in the similar vein that I keep reminding myself that what we are doing here is something different from anything we've done before. And it is not an extension of something that already exists. It is a new entity that did not exist before. And because of that, it serves to remind anyone reading the bill and anyone who will eventually implement the bill to understand precisely what those words and what those phrases do mean. And so, if we can include a definition of terms. In fact, I believe this is one of the bones of contention in the House of Representatives debate presently, as it stands. That there is no definition of terms. But although it is unnecessary in our view, I think that if it is found, if the gentleman feels that it is necessary, then I really do not have any strong objections to having those terms put in as part of the substitute bill.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Mr. President. So at the proper time, we will propose amendments, and which hopefully will be accepted by the distinguished sponsor. So moving on to that question where I said my second question, which you partly answered, let me just place on record my thinking. Because Section 1 of your bill states that the bill shall be known and cited as the basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. In other parts of the bill, however, the law referred to as the Bangsamoro Basic Law, or even simply Basic Law. I believe that if a short title of the bill should be used, it should be used throughout the bill. It should expressly state and use the same uniformly across the entire law. What do you think of that, Mr. Sponsor? Mr. President, I'm sorry.
Yes, but meron ba tayo natirang BBL dito? That's right. The gentleman is correct. We used the word, we used the phrase, we used the short title, Basic Law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. I thought that we had expunged all reference to BBL, or the Bangsamoro Basic Law. What we do use as a shorter title, or to refer to the Basic Law on the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, is Basic Law.
All right.
However, again, if it is not clear that we are referring, because if we pass whatever version we pass now in the Senate and by Congress, whatever version we pass, the Bangsamoro Basic Law simply will no longer exist because it has been amended and the titles have been changed. And the amended and the substitute bill, the amended bill, will now have the title, well, the original title, the full title, and the short title of Basic Law for Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. So we felt that it was sufficient to refer to that this is now the Basic Law. There is no Bangsamoro Basic Law in extant once we have passed this. And so that it will be clear that Basic Law refers to this substitute bill and the law that will eventually be passed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. We started reviewing the original bill that was presented to us. And then I transferred, or I moved on to reviewing your substitute bill, Mr. President. Now, I noticed that under Section 3 of the original bill, and now in your Section 2, you deleted the term or the phrase freedom of choice. May we know the reason for the deletion of freedom of choice under Section 3 of the original bill?
I am
Section 2 do sa dating bill pala, Mr. President.
Because we felt the Section 2 was not sufficient. In fact, if that is why we put in other provisions later on in the body of the bill that strengthens this idea of the freedom of choice of other indigenous peoples. And that has been established. That is why we came to the new term that we have not used before, the Non-Moro indigenous peoples, because we wanted to have a very clear reference and a very clear understanding to the groups that we are talking about, in Muslim Mindanao. So the Section 2 in the original bill was a little cursory, a little too short, a little too vague, and we felt that we needed to strengthen it, beef it up, as it were, and put in more details. The specific intent of all of the language in the bill that refers to indigenous peoples is essentially the to make an assurance to the indigenous people, the non-Moro indigenous peoples in Muslim Mindanao, in the eventual Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, that the IPRA law will be continuously and assiduously applied by the Bangsamoro government. And although the IPRA law already exists, it served. I think the events of the last couple of weeks have shown that there is a great deal more that needs to be done in terms of defending, respecting the rights and of our indigenous peoples, not only in Muslim Mindanao but all over the country. And so that is why we felt that one sentence was not sufficient. I think that so that we have made sure that the not only that the IPRA law is, as I said, assiduously followed, but also that there is a monitoring system to make sure that that is the case within the Bangsamoro government, and that is the proposal that is contained elsewhere in the bill, where we have established the Ministry on Non-Moro Indigenous Peoples, essentially to protect and defend the rights of the non-Moro Indigenous peoples in the Bangsamoro area.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. As a matter of fact, I am glad that you removed it. It might be misinterpreted as a proposal of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Mr. President.
Well,
just kidding. Levity aside,
Mr. President, I can see how that could be possible, and then that validates the decision to remove it. Therefore, to make the bill more clear and to make sure there is no room for misinterpretation.
Anyway, thank you, Mr. President. Let me. Well,
furthermore, Mr. President, it also falls foul of on a constitutional basis, because the freedom of choice was a ground for striking down the MOA Act as unconstitutional. So if we return it into the substitute bill, we can guarantee that it will again be struck down by the Supreme Court.
Right.
So that was the basis. And since we were upon the subject anyway, we thought that we would, as I said, expand and strengthen the rules that govern the application of the IPRA law for the non-Moro indigenous peoples.
Okay. Speaking of the Constitution, Mr. President, Section 3 states that the purpose of this basic law is to establish the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in accordance with the provisions of the 1987 Philippine Constitution and the etc. etc. Just a thought, Mr. President. If I'm not mistaken, you have mentioned and used this phrase a number of times in the bill, in accordance with the provisions of the 1987 Constitution. Ano ba ang purpose nito? Pandiin.
Dahil yan ang unang, kung maalala ninyo, nung unang nakita ang draft BBL, wala pang isang araw, lahat ng ating mga commentator na abogado at constitutionalist ay sinabi unconstitutional ito, or it will require constitutional amendments. Kaya't para maliwanag, dahil meron tayong mga open-ended na sinasabi natin, binibigyan natin ng powers yung Bangsamoro government, at open-ended yung powers na yun, hindi natin linilimit. The only limit is it has to be whatever the Bangsamoro, whatever is passed by the Bangsamoro Parliament as a law will have to be in accordance with it has to be it has to be consistent with national law, and more importantly, it must also be consistent with all of the provisions of the Constitution. And the reason that it is repeated many times is to make sure, is to delineate very clearly exactly how far and what are the areas that the Bangsamoro Parliament can pass laws concerning subjects that the Bangsamoro Parliament can pass laws. But we have to be very, very consistent in saying that in these areas, in this or that area, that whatever is passed the Bangsamoro Parliament still has to be in accordance with, it has to be consistent with national law, has to be in accordance with the Constitution. Dahil kung hindi natin ilagay yun, maaaring magpasa sila ng batas na hindi na nga. Dahil nga yung powers na ibinibigay natin, bago ito eh. Hindi naman natin naibigay, hindi naman na-devolve yan. This kind of autonomy has never been given to any other government, local government, or autonomous government. That's why many of these powers we are still in the process of defining it. So the Parliament, the Bangsamoro Parliament, trabaho nila yan. They will try and see and push the boundaries and see exactly what the limits are to those powers. And that the ultimate test will, of course, be the legal one, the constitutional one. So as long as they are legal, then it is allowed. And the legality of it will be determined, again, by its constancy with national law and it being in accordance with the Constitution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Let me move on to Section 4. If this bill will be passed into law, Mr. President, may we know the expected population of the Bangsamoro people?
Good question. Meron ba tayong material dyan? What is R? Well, actually the question is, I cannot answer the question about the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region definitively, Mr. President, dahil ang mga kasama sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region hindi pa na-determine. Dahil hindi pa tayo nagpe-plebisito, hindi pa natin alam kung ilang probinsya ang masasama sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And that is the only way, hanggat wala pa tayo ng listahan ng mga probinsya at mga lungsod na sumama sa Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, hindi natin mabibigay ang numero ng nakatira doon sa area ngayon. As a guide, however, Mr. President, ang population na nasa loob ng ARM is approximately 4 million. So, if the core provinces, the 5 core provinces, member provinces, stay within of ARM, stay within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, then more or less we will have the same.
At least.
More or less.
At least.
O kung may dumagdag, then that will be additional. But as a guide, I think as a starting point, as a baseline, we can use the population of ARM, which is, to be very exact, 3,943,000, according to the. I would imagine this comes from the NSO in their census that they conduct.
So you
I
would
believe
not,
this is the last one. It was 2010.
you will not venture a guess. The reason I asked expected, what is the expected number?
Hindi natin masasabi
Hindi
because
masabi.
we really
All right.
cannot say what
Okay.
the results of the plebiscite will be.
Let me tell you why I asked that, Mr. President. In your Section 4, you define Bangsamoro people as those who at the time of conquest and colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards considered themselves natives or original inhabitants of Mindanao, whether of mixed or full blood, provided that the foregoing profess the faith of Islam, shall have the right to identify themselves as Bangsamoro. Spouses and their descendants, at their option, shall also be part of Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Anyway, my query there, Mr. President, is that does this mean that even Bangsamoro people residing outside the geographical area of Bangsamoro Autonomous Region shall be covered by the Bangsamoro Basic Law? Then, if this is the definition that you have.
No, that merely defines the identity the Bangsamoro people, whether or not they are inhabitants of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. The law, the organic law, will necessarily only apply to the autonomous region and to those living in the autonomous region. So
only those living in the autonomous region.
If you are living, for example, in Metro Manila, the organic law, the basic law, does not apply to any of the bodies of government in Metro Manila. So the laws that will be the basic law will not apply to any area outside the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
What do you think is the reason, Mr. President, that this timetable was chosen by the proponents of the Bangsamoro, basically those who at the time of conquest and colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards considered themselves, why this particular time in our history? Why not during the time of Limahong? Or maybe beyond that? Why do you think they chose this?
I believe this was because this was the beginning of the conflict. Because until the Spanish time, there was no group that came in and tried to forcibly convert people of any other religion, into Catholicism, which is what the Spanish tried to do successfully in other parts of the country, but obviously unsuccessfully in Muslim Mindanao. And so the Bangsamoro people are those who opposed the imposition by the Spanish occupiers that all inhabitants should be members of the Roman Catholic faith. That is again, that is, I believe, that is the beginnings, at least, of the Muslim Mindanaoans beginning to fight and to start a conflict with what is, I suppose, would have to be referred to as the then central administration of the Spanish, centered here in Metro Manila, but of course all over the country. And to make very, very clear that from the very start, that this has been the reason why they have had movements to separate that area, because of that specific difference. So I believe that is a snapshot in the history of the Philippines, where this conflict really started to gain ground and started to become something of a national issue for the Philippines, even before we were even a republic.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President. But will you please help me understand the next section, Section 5 of your proposed bill? It states that the rights of the non-Moro indigenous cultural communities shall in no way be impaired, diluted, or diminished, even when such non-Moro indigenous cultural communities are situated within the confines of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Does this mean that even if non-Moros are inside the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, their properties and persons are not covered with this law?
No, quite the contrary. We are saying that the law has to be consistent, specifically with IPRA and other laws that protect the ancestral lands, the rights and the promotion of the culture of the non-Moro indigenous peoples. And that is why although it is again unnecessary, because the IPRA law is out there, it's already a law, and it is to be followed and implemented and followed. It was to make very, very clear what was the basis of what should be the basis of the treatment of the non-Moro indigenous peoples within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. So the laws that the Bangsamoro Parliament, the basic law, will apply to non-Moro indigenous peoples.
All right.
Any laws that are passed by the Bangsamoro Parliament will also be applicable to all inhabitants of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, whether or not they are the Bangsamoro people, whether they are settlers, whether they are indigenous peoples.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. I am enlightened. Now, may I move on to Section 7? Section 7, prerogatives enjoyed by traditional Islamic institutions such as the Sultanate. Do we have an exclusive list of the traditional Islamic institutions as contemplated in Section 7 of Article 2? Are there any guidelines or requirements before an institution can be considered as a traditional Islamic institution?
We do not have a master list, as it were, of sultanates or even the royal families, not only the sultanates, but the other royal families. We do not have any such definitive list that categorically includes all of the sultanates. This process is something that needs to be determined within. For example, in some sultanates, there are recognized, there is a sultan that is recognized. There are also other pretenders who, by virtue of their bloodline, claim to be the sultans. And that is that determination must be made by the sultanates and the members of that sultanate themselves. And it is not, I believe, for us, precisely, it is their traditional way of governance. It is their traditional way of administration. And it is precisely, this is the kind of autonomy that we are giving them, that they make that decision as to who they believe to be the true leader of their group is. Who do they believe belong to the real royal family? Who, in fact, should occupy the positions of leadership within the sultanate? So we do not determine that. We allow the traditional groups, essentially the royal families, to determine for themselves who are the leaders of that royal family, of that group, for that matter, of that tribe. That is one of the areas that we left to the sultanates, because we do not actually have any system for determining that. And the only way to determine that is really within the royal houses and the sultanates as they choose, whichever method they choose to determine that leadership. That is something that we leave to them, Mr. President.
Mr. President, there are 2 points in Section 7 that I want to understand. Traditional Islamic institutions. I wish there was a definition on what is a traditional Islamic institution. Perhaps I can be enlightened on what it is. No? And then the next one is, if you read the provision section, the prerogatives enjoyed by traditional Islamic institutions such as the sultanates shall be maintained. What are these prerogatives?
The prerogatives, the prerogatives that they enjoy are, for example, to arbitrate when there are conflicts within their royal group. Within their group. I think we can see this in many tribal cultures, wherein when there are conflicts between certain parties, for example, something simple, land, the usual, water, or the ownership of livestock, for example. When there is a conflict, they bring this conflict to their leader, and their leader, after trying to glean as much information from them, will make a determination in their judgment who is in the right. That is a prerogative that they enjoy. Furthermore, they also in the different rituals that are being that the sultanates and the royal houses go through, they play a part in that because of their authority. To answer your first question, second, I think the simple definition of the most general way that we can describe traditional Islamic institutions as it is referred to in Section 7 is to talk about the royal houses. And as I'm sure many of us have experienced, you go to Mindanao, you will be introduced to a datu, you will be introduced to a sultan, you will be introduced to a prince and a princess because they belong to the royal house. If we have attended a Muslim wedding in the south, you will also see that they explain very clearly the bloodline of those that are being married, the parents of the newlyweds, again to explain precisely what their place is within that royal house. So I think it is a fair description of what we are talking about when we talk about traditional Islamic institutions, Section 7, to say that it refers to the royal houses. Now, what if they are sultanates, if they are come in another form that is different, the versions are found, but again, they are all recognized as royal houses, and the families within the royal houses are recognized as members of that royal house.
Okay, we'll take note of that, Mr. President, and we'll review the possibility of including it if necessary. But then, in my second question on the prerogatives that are being enjoyed by these institutions, you mentioned conflicts. What else? When you say prerogatives in the plural sense, there are others.
Yes, as I said, in the rituals, the roles that they play, the fact that they can use their titles, that they can call themselves a prince or a princess or a sultan or a datu, that we continue to allow them to do, and whatever else that they do within the traditional grouping that they lead, that we will be continuing. I suppose in each one that there are slight differences, but essentially they provide leadership, they provide vision, they also provide guidance, and as I mentioned earlier, arbitration. They will also be, if we look further into that section, that the representatives of such institutions shall be consulted by the legislature. And the process of consultation of these leaders of the royal houses is certainly a traditional prerogative. So there are quite a few of these prerogatives that actually have been are tried and tested over many centuries and have been shown to be effective in keeping problems at bay, keeping the cultural heritage, on promoting the cultural heritage, and continuing in the traditional way in the modern world. And that is essentially the balance that we are trying to strike here. Of course, they exist in the 21st century, but whatever prerogatives or privileges or powers that they might have exercised as traditionally, then I think that should be allowed to continue, because that is the very essence of the identity of those peoples. And that is precisely the reason that we are writing a basic law. This is precisely the reason why we are forming an autonomous government, because it is to respect, to recognize those differences, to recognize the differences in culture, to recognize the differences in history, in law, of course in religion, and to allow the inhabitants of that area to as much leeway as possible to continue that within, again, the law of the land and the constitution of the country.
Well, as I said earlier, well, first of all, thank you for that, for the explanation. As I said earlier, I need enlightenment as well as continuing education on the purposes of this section, Mr. President. Now, my next question is on Section 8. It's quite lengthy, Mr. President, so I beg your indulgence. Let me start off with saying that in the old version of the bill, it made mention of terrestrial, fluvial, and alluvial domains and the aerial domain above it as part of the territory of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. However, in our revised version, the aforesaid phrase has been deleted. Does it mean now that these or those areas mentioned will not be a part of a geographical area of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, which will have no jurisdiction over it? Now, in your revised version, geographical area refers to the land mass as the waters over which the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region has jurisdiction. So are inland waters included? Because in the old version, there was a particular section on inland waters, but now deleted also in the revised version, which may give an interpretation that inland waters are not part of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
No, quite the contrary. In fact, there is language that later on in the bill that says that specifically says that all the land within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, all the waters within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region are under the jurisdiction of those spheres. We have removed any such reference that might be misconstrued and misinterpreted. I do not believe that was the intention, but for the rest of the country, to allay those fears that this is a step to separatism. So it is not the territory. We call it the Bangsamoro area. To get back to the specific step to separatism, so to assuage, as I said, those fears, we have removed any such reference that might be misconstrued and misinterpreted. I do not believe that was the intention, but for the rest of the country, to allay those fears that this is a step to separatism. So it is not the territory. We call it the Bangsamoro area. To get back to the specific question, Mr. President, what this is actually we tried to adopt because it simplifies also all of these the territory of the landmass as well, the maritime, terrestrial, fluvial, alluvial domains, and the aerial domain above it. There was discussion as to the aerial domain, because that would again seem to intrude upon the powers of the national government, of the state. And so to remove any doubt, we removed that part of it. And it is essentially a simplification, because when you talk about landmass as well as waters, then you already have the maritime, terrestrial, fluvial, and alluvial domains. It is only the aerial domain that has a connotation, once again, of a power that essentially belongs to the state.
So what you did was a catch-all provision, mentioning waters. May I know what provision is that you cited, Mr. President?
I'm talking about Section 8. Again, it is just a simplification. Oh, I'm sorry. I am looking also at the original BBL, and I am looking at Article 3, Section 1, entitled Definition of Territory.
Ito yun. Land mass as well as the waters over which the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region has jurisdiction. Is that all?
Yes, that is now that is the existing Section 8.
All right. The new Section 8. Okay. Now, in the case of accretion, just for my enlightenment, in the case of accretion, who shall have jurisdiction? Bangsamoro or Bangsamoro Autonomous Region or the national government?
What in what sense accretion will we you mean, are you talking about a possible
Deposit of land, Mr. President.
Oh, you
Alam
mean
nyo naman, nagbabago ang ano eh.
I understand, like a delta and okay. No, this still remains under, because what is defined is the
Area.
boundaries.
Oh.
of
So within,
the
so
Bangsamoro.
within.
So anything within.
Bangsamoro yun.
Yes. So
Alright.
if there is a change in the landscape somehow, and if that adds land area, that will still be under the jurisdiction of the Bangsamoro government.
Okay, thank you. Now, Section 9, Mr. President. Section 9, letter C, states that the geographical area of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region shall also include any province or city which are contiguous and outside the geographical area of the present arm. Now, it only mentioned province or city. May we know if municipalities are included, Mr. President?
No, they are not. The only when the plebiscite is conducted, the only local government units that can opt, should they vote in that way, can opt to be included in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region are cities and municipalities. And the reason is that we fall into a very difficult situation. Number one, where the definition of and the changes that are being made to an area, for example, a province. Let us say just a municipality will decide to leave that province, and it is to join the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. That then there are other requirements in the Constitution, in the Local Government Code, and in many other laws about how that is to be done. And so we cannot do it unless it is a province or a city. Kasi kung hindi na natin, pagka city o province, hindi na natin hahatiin, iibahin ang bayan na nasa loob ng probinsya, ang mga barabarangay sa loob ng isang lungsod. Kaya ginawa na lang namin, and this is also to be consistent with the ARM organic law in that city, and during the plebiscite for the inclusion into the ARM, the judgment was made that it should only be cities and provinces, seeing as their transfer from one entity, one province, or their transfer from whatever administrative area they belong to will not be too difficult. Dahil nga buo na sila. There is a whole province, it's a whole city. So that to transfer. Pero kung maglilipat tayo ng bayan, ng municipality, then that is a different story altogether, because you have to then redraw the boundaries of that province. The situation becomes even more complicated and difficult if you include barangays. That will immediately bring, and that's why the question of contiguity is something that we made very, very clear, that it all must be contiguous. Otherwise, it is impossible for us to be able to administer them if they are non-contiguous to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
So you are saying it is mandatory. Contiguous must be mandatory.
Oh yes, it is.
All right.
It is here that the
All right.
language says, right,
Which are
which are
contiguous.
any province or city
Yes.
which are contiguous and
outside.
outside of ARM, the present
right.
ARM.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
kung
President.
pipiliin nila na ninanais nilang masama sa plebisito, actually this 10%, a petition of 10% of the registered voters in the area asking for the inclusion is not the inclusion. It is sometimes misinterpreted to mean that by 10% petition that they are already immediately included, and that is not the case. What it means is that they will be included in the conduct of the plebiscite, when the plebiscite is conducted. And that is the way it should be.
Okay, thank you.
What it means is that they will be included in the conduct of the plebiscite when the plebiscite that will define what is the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Right. Can you explain to us the step-by-step process for the inclusion of any province or city in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President?
Very simple. Dahil ito minsanan lang. This only happens once. This happens before, this can happen only 2 months prior to the actual conduct of a plebiscite. For example, a province decides that they would like to be part of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. That decision has to be manifested, or that desire must be manifested by the petition of 10% of the registered voters of the city or the province. Once that petition is made, then they are automatically included when the plebiscite is conducted. Should the plebiscite, should the results of the plebiscite show that that city or province has voted in favor of inclusion into the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, then they will be included into the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. There's a way to... I just want to everybody include themselves and then
Well, I was about to ask if a mere resolution pass a law government unit suffice, or that you make mention of 10% of the registered voters in the area asking for inclusion, yung pala to be included in the plebiscite.
Sa plebiscito lang. Marami nga nagrereklamo, sinasabi na that's not democratic.
Siya, hindi. Tsaka it will not comply with the provision of the Constitution, which requires that only provinces, cities, and geographic areas voting favorably shall be included in the autonomous region. Ibig sabihin na, so, tama na ngayon ang intindi ko sa inyo, 10% to be included in the plebiscite.
In the plebiscite, oo.
Paano kaya nating malilinaw yan dyan? Hindi malino. Tenyo, ang basa ko sa Article 3, Section 9.
Well, ang nakalagay dito is asking for the inclusion at least to... Asking for the inclusion. We can probably still strengthen the language here.
Dagdag na natin. Like letter D, Section 9, states that a petition may be filed by at least 10% of the registered voters in the area asking for their inclusion, period. Hindi ba? So, their inclusion in the plebiscite. Pwede natin sigurong ilagay yun.
Iba yung binabasa. What the paragraph C states is that
D.
Wala akong D. I am looking at the substitute bill. The language is slightly different. The original B bill included what was the so-called opt-in provision. The opt-in provision was that at any time, the province or city, with the petition of 10% of the registered voters or a resolution of the local sanggunian, could ask that a plebiscite be conducted that they be included into the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Yun yung tinatawag na opt-in provision. Without a corresponding opt-out provision. So, kung nasa loob ka na ng Bangsamoro Region, hindi ka na makalabas. Pero kung nasa labas ka, maaari ka pa rin masama at pumasok sa Autonomous Region. That was a very difficult that is a very difficult provision to actually impose for very many reasons. And that is why we simplified it and made the opt-in provision. There is essentially, technically speaking, an opt-in provision, but it happens only once, and it happens only before the plebiscite is conducted. So in the language in paragraph C, there is any project contiguous when there is a resolution of the local government unit or a petition of at least 10% of the registered voters in the area asking for the inclusion. Maybe we can clarify this. This must be done 2 months prior to the conduct of the plebiscite.
At saka yung 10% registered voters, Mr. President, just for your reaction, can't we include a minimum number of years that they have been registered voters? Kung biglang hindi ba? Maniobra itong isang grupo, gusto nila, makasama kami, biglang nagpa-register ng kung sino-sino ron. Yung pala, kare-register lang. At hindi naman talaga sila mga dating registered voters doon. Madali po yung 10%.
Tignan natin, but magtanong tayo. I think we have to see if it is actually a practical thing. Kung kaya ng, halimbawa, ng COMELEC na gumawa ng ganong klaseng determination, titignan nila kung ilan ang, let us say, namili tayo, 5 years or 10 years, whatever the number it is we decide upon, if they can actually make the determination of who are the registered voters who have been in that area. But again, what yung mahirap siguro din dyan will be to decide how long will we require them to have been registered voters.
Well, perhaps dapat nakaboto nung nakaraang eleksyon.
At least one election previous.
One election previous.
Well, let me make inquiries with the COMELEC to see if they have that kind of information, if they can generate the kind of information that would be required if we are going to put in that kind of requirement.
That's fine with me. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Now, after the approval of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, can there be additional inclusion of provinces or cities in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region? Section 9 only contemplates on the inclusion before the passage of the Bangsamoro Basic Law.
No, there is no. There is nothing that resembles the original opt-in provision.
So wala na yun.
Wala na yun.
All
Hindi
right.
na natin sinama yun because I think that with the consultation with the other members and with the other groups, they said that this was simply impractical. Again, there are many requirements to change what is included in especially in an autonomous region. Then how we will have to remove them. For example, if it is a province, they will have to be removed from the region that they belong to because they will now move to the autonomous region. That will require reorganization of that region. That has many complications involved, and it is not as simple a matter as just getting the vote in the plebiscite and moving a province from one region to another. The regions are organized as administrative entities, and to move from one to another would be very complicated, and I do not know if I believe, in my view, it would probably be, in fact, counterproductive.
I concur, Mr. President, because I've even heard a comment saying that if there is an opt-in, there should be an opt-out.
Yes, that was much.
That makes it more complicated.
That actually makes. But that's why we cannot allow it, because it would only seem to be fair to, if you have an opt-in, to have an opt-out provision. But to do that, then you are continuously changing. There is a prospect that you will be continuously changing the boundaries of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. You will be continuously changing the boundaries of the regions that surround the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And kung masama pa, because in the original opt-in, the contiguity was a gray area, wherein contiguity did not seem to be a requirement. So masyado na talagang magulo. So it is not a practical. It would not be a practical arrangement. It would be impossible to administer.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. I move on now to Section 10. May we know the reason why the term central government was changed to national government in the substitute bill? Does it have any implication on the powers of the Bangsamoro regional government?
No. What it does is it has implications on the recognition of the national government as not merely being a central government, but being the overarching political entity. That is because central government, for example, you can talk of a highly federalized state. There is a central government, but the powers of the states are very are quite substantial, and the central government only serves as a kind of a coordinating and monitoring entity. Then that is not what we are going for. We wanted to make it very, very clear that this is an autonomous government, but it is still under it is still a political entity under the national government. So the word central was not, I believe, clear enough, and I think national government covers, answers all of those fears that it will not be, that this is a political territory that will not be part of the national government. This way we can make it very clear that they are very much part, they are an integral part of the national government.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I approve of that reason. Now, your last paragraph of Section 10 provides that, quote, 10 years after the passage of this basic law, the national government and the Bangsamoro regional government shall discuss the improvement of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region waters through necessary processes and modalities. May we know from the sponsor, Mr. President, what does this paragraph seek to achieve and what are these supposed processes and modalities, Mr. President?
They essentially, that paragraph essentially refers to development of all the waters, both the coastal and inland, in the Bangsamoro region. And if the Bangsamoro government has any proposals for example, increased development in a certain area, the inclusion of national programs or the, shall we say, the reinforcement of national programs in certain areas, that is one of the areas that is one of the reasons that we have this paragraph. The other one is to do with the conservation of the environment. Throughout our hearings, all of the groups, including the MILF, including the IPs, including all, were all very concerned with the environment and the ecology in the Bangsamoro region. And I believe that just shows that they are ancient cultures that have a very clear understanding of the importance of preservation of the environment and for the ecology to be not only preserved but to be further developed. So between the development of businesses, programs that they will have to do in coordination with the national government, there will also be assistance needed from the national government for the preservation of the environment in the area. It is something that clearly came through in our hearings, that it is an important aspect of governance for in the Bangsamoro region for all its inhabitants, and that is why we made sure that there is a possibility that that when there's assistance needed for whatever reason, for the development, for the preservation of these inland waters, that this can be done in coordination with the national government.
Why 10 years, Mr. President? Just for the record.
Well, because by 10 years we will have a good idea about what has happened, the trends that have already will already be slowly recognized. For example, the movements of populations, because we necessarily, when the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is established, I believe there will be some movement in the populations. There will be perhaps some other developments in terms of programs that the Bangsamoro now that the Bangsamoro government does not need now or does not feel is necessary for the moment, but will find to be necessary further on. And I think 10 years is sufficient time for the Bangsamoro government to see what it is that will be necessary for the continued development of these waters and also for the continued preservation of the ecology.
Okay. Moving on to Section 13, Mr. President. May we know the reason for choosing parliamentary form of government for the Bangsamoro?
Very simple. We tried to stay as close to the original proposal as we could, and the original BBL proposes a parliamentary system of government. And again, upon examination, the legal opinion on whether or not a parliamentary system of autonomous government within the unitary republican presidential system that we have in the rest of the country is unconstitutional. And so I felt that it was sufficient, a case can be made that it is in fact constitutional. And since that is the request of our Muslim brothers and sisters, then I do not see any problem. So long as it is proven to be constitutional, I do not see any problem that they should have the form of government that they choose.
All right. Then that means I move on to Section 14, where you say that the electoral system, the Bangsamoro regional government shall adopt an electoral system suitable to a parliamentary form of government which shall allow democratic participation, encourage formation of genuinely principled political parties, and ensure accountability. Paano mo yun? How is that?
That has to do, Mr. President,
Anong role, may role ba ang COMELEC dito? Yung shall
malaki.
adopt an electoral system?
Dahil ang gagawin pa, pagka napasa na itong batas, we will still have to determine what are the parliamentary districts. Dahil meron na tayong members of parliament. And each
Yung
member...
current ng ARM.
Kagaya ng ARM, meron tayong assemblyman. This will be slightly different dahil it is a parliamentary, so member of Bangsamoro Parliament sila. And what is the definition of the districts is still to be determined. That is one of the areas that we left again to the transition authority to decide how to organize the parliamentary districts. And we just wanted to be sure that in the organization of the parliamentary districts, that they are truly representative. Halimbawa, wag naman yung isang distrito na ang population 2,000, yung isang distrito 100,000. That is not a proportional representation. So just that kind of situation, so as to be clear that as much as possible, we be as even-handed in terms of giving representation. We have the same kind of idea where we say that every entity that has a certain number of voters in it is already qualified to have a congressional district. So we're saying that we should also have a look and make sure that each one of those districts encompass an area which requires and deserves representation in Parliament. We have seen the redistricting in many LGUs. Quezon City is one of the examples that we recently did. And so that process, this is just describing that process, wherein we can change the district, we can move the districts, we can redefine they can redefine the districts so as to make it as representative as possible.
It is the Bangsamoro regional government that shall do this? Or the national government? Parang hindi ako nalilinawan dito. The way I understand it is, ito, the Bangsamoro regional government shall adopt an electoral system suitable to a parliamentary form of government, which etc. 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 Anong role ng COMELEC dito? Anong role ng national government dito? Sila na ito.
Well, ang ginawa namin ay sinundan lang namin ang congressional districts. Also to align with the number of members of parliament that will be elected. So with that, we determined that out of 60, 40 will be elected. Therefore, we have to define 40 districts, parliamentary districts within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. This actually it's a good question because kung magbago, halimbawa sa plebisito, napakaraming sumama na probinsya. Lumaki ng husto yung Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, baka hindi na sapat yung 40. Baka kailangan natin dagdagan. So I think that a mechanism still has to be evolved so that we
Precisely.
can be more responsive to the actual situation on the ground. This applies.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry to butt in. Which brings me to my original question: is the Bangsamoro regional government the one who will do that?
Right now, we just follow the because right now we have no option to do that. All we have done is we have followed the original proposal of the membership of the Bangsamoro Parliament. We have assumed that it will be applicable to a region that will be similar, if not exactly the same as ARM. That is the only guideline that we can have right now. So if we choose to change the definition of the parliamentary districts, I believe that the Bangsamoro Parliament should have that power in the future. But for the very beginning, we just followed the congressional districts as they are now.
Well, based on that kind of a perspective, what is the role of the COMELEC, Mr. President?
The role of the COMELEC is the same as its role in any other place. They will conduct
with the under the supervision of the COMELEC.
We actually have that language further on in the bill, where it specifically refers to the COMELEC's duties. The Bangsamoro COMELEC office's duties in the Bangsamoro. They are exactly the same as the COMELEC office's duties in any other LGU, province, city, municipality.
All right. So yeah, under direct supervision of the COMELEC.
Direct supervision and control of the COMELEC.
All right. Thank you. Now, Section 15, Mr. President. With the passage of the Bangsamoro Basic Law, which expressly, and I quote, renounces war as an instrument of national policy, adopts the generally accepted principles of international law as part of the law of the land, and adheres to the policy of peace, equality, justice, freedom, cooperation, and amity of all nations, end of quote. Now, will this ensure that there will be no further violence in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region? Will this prevent breakaway insurgent groups? What do you think, Mr. President?
I'm afraid there are no guarantees in that regard. As you can see, there are still elements outside of Bangsamoro in the Philippines that are continuing to wage violence against the government, with an eye to bringing down the government and to bring about violent change. So, despite it not being a national policy, all we can do is to make sure that we are aware of any such intentions by any group and counter them. That is the best that we can do. We cannot control small groups from sprouting up and deciding that they should take up arms against the government. But however, it is not allowed, or it is a stated the stated policy of the Bangsamoro government itself. Well, and another individual group we can only monitor and try to control them, whereas the Bangsamoro government cannot indulge in a change in policy that embraces violence as a matter of as an instrument of change. As another side note, I would just like to be made very clear. I would just like to make very clear that in that paragraph, it was pointed out earlier by Senator Pimentel that the word national should actually read regional. Because at this point, we are saying that this is a policy determined by Bangsamoro government for national. And that was an oversight on my part, and we left in national.
So you mean renounces war as an instrument of regional
policy? Exactly. So doon sa area nila, na hindi sila, basta sa area nila, hindi nila papalitan ng kanilang polisi at sasabihin ay kami lumalaban na sa pamahalaan.
So, well, at the proper time, it probably will be a committee amendment.
That is right.
Okay.
That is right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Section 16, Mr. President, states that the Bangsamoro regional government shall enact measures that protect and enhance the right of all people to human dignity, reduce social, economic, and political inequalities, and remove cultural inequities. Does the phrase right of all people include Moro or non-Moro people and even foreigners, Mr. President?
Well, I think this is just an abbreviated restatement of the Bill of Rights, Mr. President. It is just a recognition that the Bill of Rights is still the guiding, that still has all the guide, is the guiding principle that we follow whenever we are dealing with the rights of individuals. So this will include everyone.
Yes.
That is within the Bangsamoro, or for that matter, even non-inhabitants, but those that are within the jurisdiction of the Bangsamoro government.
So the answer is in the affirmative, Mr. President.
That is right, Mr.
All
President.
right, thank you. Section 18, Mr. President, recognizes the rights of the non-Moro indigenous peoples. May we know how how are the non-Moros affected by the passage of this bill?
Well, that is because, as has been pointed out, there will be conflicts and alternate claims on land is usually what the problem is. And the rights that we are talking about are those rights that are ascribed to them by, again, the IPRA on ancestral domain for the indigenous peoples. So once those have been determined, because it is possible that it will be misinterpreted by some saying that, oh, meron na tayong Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, amin lahat yan. Amin naman talaga yan eh. Parang ganon. May mga ganon, meron ako naririnig na ganyan. Kuminsan palabiro, kuminsan hindi. And that is why this had to be made very clear that no, if they are the ancestral domain of the indigenous, non-Moro indigenous peoples, then that ancestral domain is recognized, will be recognized by the Bangsamoro government. It usually has to do with, again, with land, with water, the supply of the supply of water, this kind of really quite common conflicts that we see not only in Muslim Mindanao but around the country.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. President. Section 19. It relates, Article 5, no? Section 19 relates to the reserved power of the government. I think I comprehend most of it. But however, number 11 of Section 19, which pertains to free ports, basically gives the Bangsamoro regional government the authority to establish and operate the free ports within the areas. Isn't this supposed to be included in Section 20 under concurrent powers? And can we be clarified?
The gentleman, Mr. President, is exactly right. We only saw it. Mali nalagay namin sa maling section. That does not belong there. That belongs, as precisely as you have pointed, as has been pointed out, to concurrent rights, because there will be joint administration when it comes to the creation of the free ports within Bangsamoro is within the powers of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. However, the collection of tariffs, the collection of fees, etc., will still have to be conducted by the customs, and so it is a concurrent right. And yes, it does not belong there. It does belong in the section on concurrent powers.
All right, thank you. Now, so we will expect that from the committee. You know,
that will be a committee.
Need not be an individual amendment.
That will be a committee amendment when the time comes.
Thank you. Also, are there any limitations or guidelines for the creation of establishments of free ports? I'm afraid this may be the subject of abuse. As provided in the bill, in your bill, free ports enjoy the same benefits as a special economic zone, both tax and other incentives. Now, there should therefore be a limit, or at the very least, guidelines as to how this may be created by the Bangsamoro Autonomous Government, since any special economic zones will invariably affect the national government. Baka mangyari dyan, Pagka merong genius na nakapasok dyan, gawin lahat report yun.
Oo nga, na lumabas din yung posibilidad na yan nung sa aming usapan. But again, I think that it would now run counter to the idea, to the language that says that the Bangsamoro Regional Government shall coordinate with and assist. Ibig sabihin, kailangan masasabi ng national government, hindi nyo pwedeng gawing Freeport lahat dahil hindi natin pwedeng i-administer yan. At ang mangyayari dyan, ay siyempre, alam na natin ang mangyayari, it will be used as a legal smuggling point. But so long as the national government is still involved, and they'll say, sige, kung meron pinopropose na Freeport, na halimbawa, sabihin natin 30, ay sasabihin ng national government, hindi feasible yan. Dahil unang-una, hindi tayo makakolekta at magiging problema para sa CIQ natin, para sa Customs, Immigration, and Quarantine. So, hindi namin kayang i-administer yan at sa palagay namin, it's a bad idea. That is why it is required that they will coordinate with and assist the national government on Customs, Immigration, Quarantine services, and international commitments. That's important, because the country has international commitments concerning things like free economic zones and free ports. So again, it has still to be coordinated with the national government. It has still to be consistent with the national policy of government on free ports and eco zones.
Your explanation is clear, but I don't see it here. So
I thought that coordinate and assist would be sufficient. But kung gusto nating patibayin pa, ay wala naman siguro.
Mas maganda pong malinaw.
Wala naman sigurong problema doon. So,
baka nga may mga genius na lumitaw eh.
Palagay ko nga meron mag-iisip na magandang idea yun, na buksan na lang lahat. Pero hindi talaga maaari at magiging, siyempre, magiging notorious lang yung area na yan na kung ano-anong pwedeng ipasok at hindi makakatulong yan sa Bangsamoro region.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad that the gentleman agrees.
Pwedeng gawin dyan.
All right. Section 20, Mr. President. May we know the reason for establishing an auditing unit in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region? What would be the effect of the establishment of a separate auditing unit to the functions of the COA? What kind of relationship will this separate Bangsamoro auditing unit have with the COA? And will the auditing unit be under the control and the supervision of the COA, or are they considered separate or distinct, Mr. President?
Mr. President, this is precisely one of the main points that were found to be unconstitutional in the original BBL. In the original BBL, there would be an Bangsamoro Auditing Office, a BAO, was the original proposal. However, it was not clear that its relationship, that Bangsamoro Auditing Office, what the relationship would be with the COA. Now, the Constitution clearly states that the COA will audit all of the government entities according to well-established, well-recognized, and accepted auditing practices, and that is the mandate that the COA has. We just wanted to make it very, very clear that we are not in any way diminishing the powers of COA as mandated by the Constitution by having a separate auditing office in the Bangsamoro. Now, although there is some language that says they will still be reporting to the COA in the original BBL, it was not clear under whose control and supervision it was. And because of that, then there was a question as to that provision's constitutionality. So we tried to, in this language here, make it very, very clear that the Bangsamoro Auditing Office will be under the supervision and control of the COA. It will be the equivalent, I guess, of instead of provincial auditing office, an auditing office, the COA, let's say COA Quezon City or COA Manila or COA Tagbilaran, it is going to be just the COA in the Bangsamoro. So they will still fall under the auspices of their hierarchy, of their organizational structure under COA. Furthermore, Mr. President, this was something that needed attention, because we hear over and over again that ARM was a failed experiment. And I have to say once again that I do not agree. But nevertheless, that is a reason given why we are reorganizing the autonomous region. Now, one of the main problems that we saw in the ARM was the misuse of funds. And I think what happened in the Maguindanao, in the massacre in what is now referred to as the Ampatuan, the Ampatuan massacre, is that we saw upon further examination that much of the funds were not used to provide services or to develop the ARM. There were several instances where it was clearly shown that the funds that the national government was giving to the to the ARM government were being used to buy arms, were being used to buy expensive automobiles and vehicles, were used to build very luxurious houses, and just went into the pockets of some of the officials there. And so, if we are to remedy that situation, and we saw what the effects of that kind of entitlement that the leadership began to feel, we have to make sure of the transparency and accountability. If this is to be a success, especially since much of the funding that will go into the Bangsamoro autonomous region will come from the rest of the country, then the transparency and accountability must also be very clearly seen by everyone around the country. So it cannot be an internal audit. It cannot be an audit that merely reports to the COA. It must be a very clear process of auditing within the general accepted practices that we already apply to other local government units and the national government, for that matter.
All right. Thank you. I take that, Mr. President. Although, if with a review, I hope you will not mind if we can tweak this a little, just in case.
Mr. President, any improvements to the substitute bill are most welcome.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me move on to number 6 of Section 20, Civil Service. With the creation of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Regional Civil Service Office, or the BAR CSO, how will this affect the current setup of the Civil Service Commission? I wish to be clarified on the specific power or duty of the national government as regards to civil service, because the provision, the way I read it, is I am not quite clear as to the national government's participation relative to civil service, except that the organizational structure and staffing pattern are to be designed and implemented by the Bangsamoro Regional Government. It says shall be subject to the minimum standards and guidelines prescribed by the Civil Service Commission. May we be enlightened, Mr. President?
Yes, this is another case of a very obvious constitutional question in the original BBL, wherein the civil service was separate or could be interpreted as being separate from the Civil Service Commission, wherein we know that the Civil Service Commission is a constitutional body and its jurisdiction must apply to every part of the country. So, again, this will be similar in concept to the Commission on Audit Office of the Bangsamoro. It will be the CSC office in the Bangsamoro region. Now, the reason that the Bangsamoro regional government shall design and implement its own organizational structure is that they are parliamentary system, and therefore they will necessarily be different from the other structures and systems that we use around the country. and it is up to them to design that. But however, the guarantees that the Civil Service Code provides for its members, for the members of the bureaucracy, must still continue to apply. The guarantees on tenure, the guarantees on pay grade, the guarantees on seniority, the guarantees on benefits, all of this must continue. And that is why there is mention here of that it is all subject to the minimum standards and guidelines prescribed by the Civil Service Commission. In other words, the treatment of all members of the civil service, all civil servants, be they in Bangsamoro Autonomous Region or outside of it, the treatment should be the same. We will continue to follow. The Civil Service Code is a law, is a national law, and that is the guiding. That is what guides the standards and guidelines of the CSC, and those should also pertain when it comes to the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
That includes salary standardization, security of tenure, unions, collective bargaining.
All of the privileges, all of what is allowed, what is granted in the Civil Service Code should apply to the bureaucracy in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Government.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. You practically answered the next two questions that I had for section for number 6. I mean, of section 20. Now, still on that, concurrent. Well, may we know the reason why the Coast Guard matters is under section 20 under concurrent powers and not included in the reserved powers of the national government, considering that the national defense is included in section 19 under reserved powers?
The Coast Guard is not seen as part of the national defense, Mr. President. It is
because it is civilian in character.
It is a civilian entity, and it's not part of the armed forces of the Philippines. That I think the nature of the Coast Guard is beginning to change. They are becoming closer and closer in nature to the AFP. But however, as it stands now, they still are a civilian organization. And although it is again similar to other LGUs. In other LGUs, we have the Maritime PNP that is still under the national government, but of course they work in coordination with the local government. So the concept here is exactly similar, exactly the same as that, in that there needs to be the job of the Coast Guard cannot be done by taking orders only from the headquarters in Manila. The situation on the ground must always be taken into account, and that is why this is a concurrent. That is why this is a shared power between the national government and the Bangsamoro government.
Mr. President, I'm very sorry. I'll have to beg your indulgence. I'm stuck with Section 20. I was hoping that my first part, which can end up all the way up to Section 27, can be done today, but apparently I lack time because I really have to terminate my interpellation at this point. Not terminate, but suspend. So if you don't mind, Mr. President and the distinguished sponsor, let me suspend my interpellation on Section 20 and proceed on Monday, Mr. President. I'll try to finish Part 1 all the way on Monday, and hopefully my Part 2 included also on Monday, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator
Thank you.
Soto.
So I wish to thank the sponsor, Mr. President, for answering my questions.
It was certainly the gentleman is most welcome.
Mr. President, there are still a number of our colleagues who have signified their intent to interpolate. I thus move for the suspension of the basic law on the Bangsamoro.
Consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, may we acknowledge, I'm not sure if they're still in the gallery, but I received this paper for the marketing management students of the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, PUP, and the Irrogationist Seminary College headed by Brother Francis Cayao, RCJ. I move for the recognition, Mr. President.
Our guests, as spread into the record by the Majority Leader, are hereby acknowledged and they're welcome to the Senate.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2909 under Committee Report 203. This is the bill on credit surety fund cooperatives, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status is that the sponsor delivered his sponsorship speech last August 19. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order on Senate Bill number 2909.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Aquino.
Senator Aquino is recognized.
Mr. President, no one has indicated their intention to interpolate.
Mr. President, in view of the manifestation of the sponsor, I move that we close the period of interpellations.
Any objection? Hearing none, period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, we have no committee amendments.
There are no committee amendments.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of committee amendments and open the period for individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period for committee amendments is terminated. Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, the sponsor is indicating that there are no individual amendments. Oh, there are individual, I'm sorry. I move that we, in such view, I move that we suspend or close the period of individual amendments in the meantime.
Right. I'm sorry, what do we do now?
There are apparently some individual amendments, but
right.
to be proposed on another day. So in view of that, I move that we close the period and suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2909.
We have closed the period for committee amendments. We are now going to suspend consideration of the measure to allow our colleagues to submit their individual amendments at the next session. So consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2835 under Committee Report 177. This is the bill on anti-ambulance chasing, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of individual amendments. I thus move for recognition as the sponsor, as the acting chair of the Committee on Labor, Mr. President.
The acting chair of the Committee on Labor and the acting majority leader is recognized.
Thank you, sir. I'm doing a lot of acting today, Mr.
Yes.
President. There are amendments, and I just like to confirm that that we received this from the office of the Senate President. And if I may proceed, Mr. President, using the September 7 copy.
Yes.
Thank
Please.
you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Amendments to Section 2 on page 1, line 3, after the word prohibition to replace the word of with on.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 5, after seafarers, to delete the phrase and other workers similarly situated.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 6, after against, replace an employer with their employers.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 1, line 9, add S to seafarer to make it plural.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The same page, from lines 9 to 10, delete the phrase or other workers similarly situated.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, Mr. President, line 10, before heirs, to insert their.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 10, after the word heirs, to delete the word thereof.
Insert the word thereof. Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, Mr. President, from lines 10 to 12, to delete the following sentence. The Secretary of Labor and Employment shall, through the appropriate rules and regulations, determine such other workers similarly situated as seafarers using reasonable criteria.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
So the section will now read as follows, Mr. President. Prohibition on ambulance chasing. It shall be unlawful for any person to engage in ambulance chasing or the act of soliciting personally or through an agent from seafarers or their heirs the pursuit of any claim against their employers for the purpose of recovery of monetary claim or benefit, including legal interest arising from accident, illness, or death in exchange of an amount or fee which shall be retained or deducted from the monetary claim or benefit granted to or awarded to the seafarers or their heirs.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, if I may proceed, on page 1, line 14, this is the section 3. To delete the title of the section and replace with the new title, imposition of excessive fees.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 14, before the word any, to insert the word when.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 15, after the word between, to replace the with a.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 15, to delete or other workers similarly situated.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, on line 15, before the word heirs, to replace their with his/her.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 15, after the word and, to replace the with a.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 4, after disputes, to replace the word stipulating with stipulates.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 5, after fees, to delete the word exceeding and insert the following, comma, such fees shall not exceed.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 6, to delete the phrase other worker or.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 6, before the word heirs, to insert his/her.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 7, Mr. President, delete the phrase thereof shall be null and void.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, from line 7 to 9, to delete the sentence starting from this fee on line 7 up to the word case on line 9.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 13, to delete the phrase other workers similarly situated.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 13, before heirs, to insert his/her.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 13, after the word heirs, to delete thereof.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, if I may read section 3.
Please proceed, yes.
Section 3, imposition of excessive fees when any contract or arrangement between a seafarer or his/her heirs and the person who appears for or represents them in any case for recovery of monetary claim or benefit, including legal interest arising from accident, illness, or death, before the National Labor Relations Commission, NLRC, or any labor arbiter, the National Conciliation and Mediation Board, NCMB, the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, POEA, the Department of Labor and Employment, DOLE, or its regional offices or other quasi-judicial bodies handling labor disputes, stipulates that the person who appears for or represents them shall be entitled to fees, comma, such fees shall not exceed 10% of the compensation or benefit awarded to the seafarer or his or her heirs. For purposes of this act, fees referred to in this section shall mean the total amount of compensation of the person who appears for or represents the seafarer or his/her heirs for services rendered. End of the section.
Duly noted.
Now, if we may proceed to section 4, Mr. President, on page 2, line 15, to delete the phrase and section 3.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Amendments to section 5, Mr. President, on page 2, line 24, after the word marina, to insert the word and.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 25, Mr. President, after POEA, to delete the phrase and appropriate labor organizations.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, the next amendment is for the insertion of a new section 7, which shall read as follows. Effectivity clause. This act shall take effect 15 days after its publication in the official gazette or in at least 2 newspapers of general circulation.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. 1 minute suspension with the permission of the chamber.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, an anterior amendment, please, if we may be permitted.
Please proceed.
On page 1, between lines 2 and 3, to insert a new section 2, which shall read as follows, subject to style. Declaration of policy. It shall be the policy of the state to promote and protect every Filipino seafarer desiring to work overseas by securing the best possible terms and conditions of employment, as some lawyers have taken advantage of the plight of our seafarers who met an accident, illness, or death in the course of their service. To exploit the compensation system, these law practitioners have purposely sought excessive labor claims not commensurate to their actual entitlement, if not at all bogus. Unwittingly, our seafarers have fallen prey to this scheme, enticed by the promise of huge monetary award. Apparently, these ambulance chasers do not only resort to this unacceptable practice, but also charge exorbitant legal fees.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, if we may make a omnibus motion to renumber the sections accordingly. So move.
Approved. Is there a proposed amendment to section 1, which is on line 1 of page 1? This is the title of the...
Yes, Mr. President. That's
the
we've saved that for last. To replace the title, the Anti-Ambulance Chasing Act, with the word Seafarers Protection Act.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Now we move to the title, Mr. President. If we would amend it to an act protecting seafarers against ambulance chasing and imposition of excessive fees and providing penalties thereof.
Any
No. I'm sorry, Mr. President. May I have 1 minute suspension?
1 minute suspension.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Amendments to the title, so it should read as follows: an act protecting seafarers against ambulance chasing and imposition of excessive fees and providing penalties therefore.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no other individual amendments. I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is terminated.
I don't think there are other members who wish to provide or propose individual amendments, Mr. President. I move that we vote on second reading the proposed measure, Senate Bill 2835.
There is a motion that we approve on second reading Senate Bill 2835. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
Mr. President, before we take up the next matter...
Can we move for the suspension of the measure? Consideration of the measure.
Yes, Mr. President. I move that we suspend consideration of the measure, Senate Bill number 2835.
So suspended.
Mr. President, before we move to the next item, may we recognize some of our guests. We have with us Commissioner NLRC, Commissioner Bel Ortiguera, and Commissioner Ted Villanueva. I move for their recognition, Mr. President.
The presence of our guests from the NLRC is recognized.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2837 under Committee Report 179. This is the bill on the National Labor Relations Commission, Mr. President.
Nice sponsor. Consideration of the measure is in order. For the record, this bill was sponsored when, Mr. President?
June 9. June 9 is the date.
Sorry?
Of, June 9, Mr. President.
June 9 of 2015.
This year. Yes.
Yes. Please proceed, Mr. Majority Leader.
That is a parliamentary status. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations, Mr. President.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Once more, I move that we recognize this representation as the acting chairman to sponsor the measure.
The acting majority leader and acting chairman of the Committee on Labor is hereby recognized.
Mr. President, there are none of our colleagues have signified their intent to interpellate on the measure. I thus move that we close the period of interpellation.
Period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, 1 minute suspension.
1 minute suspension is not. Hmm?
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we move to open the period of interpellations. Forgive me, Mr. President. The period for committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
There are none, Mr. President. I move that we close the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there are no individual amendments, and from this representation, and none of our colleagues have likewise signified their intent to propose individual amendments. I thus move that we
Period for
close
individual amendments is
the
terminated.
period. Mr. President, I move that we
1
vote.
minute suspension before you proceed.
Yes, Mr. President.
Hindi pa na-introduce. Committee amendments is not being introduced.
Ready to resume,
Session
Mr. President.
resumed.
Mr. President, we've closed the period of interpellation and amendments, so I move that we vote on second reading Senate Bill 2837 under Committee Report number 179.
Is there any objection? Hearing none. Then, the motion to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2837, which is an amendment to the National Labor Relations Commission, amending Articles 213 and 215 of PD 442, is hereby approved on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2837 under Committee Report 179.
Consideration of measure is suspended.
Mr. President, I move for administrative matters the transfer of committee referral on Senate Resolution 1572, resolution urging the appropriate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the veracity of the reported harassment, killings, forced evacuations, and dispossession of ancestral lands, among others, in the communities and tribal schools in the Lumad areas in Mindanao, with the end and goal of immediately putting an end to it, meting out the appropriate sanctions to those liable, and formulating legislative measures protecting, furthering, and improving the welfare and well-being of various indigenous peoples and tribes in the Philippines. And Senate Resolution 1573, resolution directing the proper Senate committees to investigate in aid of legislation the reported human rights violations against indigenous cultural communities, indigenous peoples in Mindanao, perpetrated by elements of the armed forces of the Philippines and paramilitary groups. Proposed Senate Resolution 1575, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an investigation in aid of legislation into the possible case of extrajudicial killing of Alternative Learning Center for Agriculture and Livelihood Development, ALCADEV Executive Director Emerito Samarca, Manobo Lumad Leader Jonel Campos, and Datu Uvelio Sinzo, that took place on September 1, 2015 in Barangay Giatagon, Lianga, Surigao del Sur, allegedly perpetrated by members of the Philippine Army and local paramilitary groups. Mr. President, the Senate in plenary has made primary referral of proposed Senate resolutions mentioned to the Committee on Cultural Communities, while secondary referral was made to the Committee on National Defense and Security. With the consent of the body, I move to transfer the primary referral of proposed Senate resolutions 1572, 1573, and 1575 from the Committee on Cultural Communities to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, and the secondary referral from the Committee on National Defense and Security to the Committee on Cultural Communities. I so move.
Before we act on that motion, what about the privileged speech on the same subject which was delivered yesterday? Would that also...
Can we also include that in the referral, Mr. President?
All right. So the... what?
So if we include, that is Senate Resolution 1586, a resolution directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that a school head and the two Lumad leaders were killed by paramilitary gunmen in Surigao del Sur.
Similarly referred to the
Similarly
committee.
referred to primarily the Committee on Justice and Human Rights, and secondarily to the Committee on Cultural Communities, including the interpellations of Senator Legarda, Mr. President.
So the four resolutions and the privileged speech at yesterday's session are all referred to the Committee on Justice as the principal committee, and the Committee on
Cultural Communities.
Cultural Communities as a secondary committee.
So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
Mr. President, is it the pleasure of the presiding officer to continue the reference or to do it for another day?
There are just a few. We might as well do it. There are just a few additional reference of
I
business.
move for the reference of business, Mr. President.
Secretary will read the additional reference of business.
Additional reference of business. Committee reports. Committee report number 252 submitted jointly by the Committees on National Defense and Security and Finance on Senate Bill number 1830, introduced by Senator Trillanes, an act providing for an increase in the standing force of the Armed Forces of the Philippines through the recruitment, special enlistment, provisional enlisted personnel, recommending its approval with amendments by Senator Trillanes.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 253 submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service Government Reorganization and Professional Regulation and Finance on Senate Bill number 2901, introduced by Senator Trillanes, an act providing for a cost of living allowance, COLA, for all employees in the government sector and for other related purposes, recommending its approval with amendments. Sponsor Senator Trillanes IV.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 254, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Civil Service, Government Organization, Professional Regulation, and Education, Arts, and Culture on Senate Bill number 2952, with Senator Soto III, Trillanes IV, and Cayetano P. as authors thereof, an act granting educational assistance and benefits to the dependents of all members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine National Police, Bureau of Fire Protection, Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, National Bureau of Investigation, Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, Philippine Coast Guard, and Bureau of Corrections, who are killed or permanently incapacitated while in the performance of their duty, or by reason of their office or position, recommending its approval and substitution of Senate Bill number 2687, sponsors Senators Trillanes IV and Soto III.
Calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, there being no other business to take up, I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 21, 2015.
Session is adjourned until Monday, September 21, 2015 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.